You have watched someone spiral toward a decision you already know will destroy them. You said nothing, because how do you explain that you have seen the ending of a story while it is still unfolding? You have absorbed someone's grief so completely that hours later you are carrying despair that was never yours, and you have stood between two people, translating words they both spoke but somehow could not hear. If others have called these moments coincidence or oversensitivity, you are not imagining your inheritance. The alchemists knew this, the seers carried it, the mythic guides have always recognized it. This video names what you possess. Welcome to Power and Myth. The powers you carry are not supernatural abilities divorced from psychological reality. They are specific cognitive architecture that Jung spent decades mapping and that the ancients knew by different names. What psychology calls introverted intuition, operating with extraverted feeling, is the mystery tradition recognized as the seer's sight. What cognitive function theory describes as unconscious pattern synthesis, the alchemists understood as transmutation. You are not discovering new abilities, you are remembering old ones, and 3 lineages hold the key to understanding what you have always been. The first is the lineage of the alchemist, not the fantasy of turning lead into gold, but the ancient art of transformation through containment. The alchemist takes base material and, through precise conditions, transforms it into something refined. This is your gift with emotional experience. You do not simply feel what others feel, you absorb it, contain it within yourself, and through some process you cannot fully explain, you metabolize it. The rage someone brings into the room becomes calm by the time they leave. The anxiety that filled the space dissolves, and you are left depleted, carrying residue that was never meant to be yours. The alchemical vessel was always the alchemist's own body. The furnace was their own nervous system. Every INFJ knows this exhaustion. You have been the container for transformation your entire life. But here is what the alchemical tradition understood that modern psychology often misses. Transformation requires structure. The alchemist did not simply throw substances together and hope for change. There were stages, there were boundaries. There was recognition that some materials could be transmuted, whereas others would poison the vessel itself. You have learned this the hard way. The person whose pain you absorbed for months, who never actually wanted to change. The relationship where you kept metabolizing their chaos, whilst your own foundation crumbled. The alchemist's first lesson is discernment. Not every substance belongs in your vessel. Not every transformation is yours to perform. And the moments you have walked away from someone you desperately wanted to help were not failures. They were the alchemist protecting the integrity of the vessel itself, because if the container shatters, no transformation is possible. This is wounded healer territory, the archetype Jung identified in Chiron, the centaur whose unhealable wound became the source of his gift for healing others. Your capacity to transform pain is built on your intimacy with your own. You know suffering from the inside. You recognize it in others because you have mapped its territory in yourself. But the shadow of the wounded healer is believing that your worth depends on your ability to heal, that you must continue to absorb toxicity to prove your strength. That rest is abandonment of your purpose. The alchemical lineage teaches otherwise. Even furnaces require cooling. Even vessels need emptying. The power is not diminished by boundary, it is preserved. The second lineage is the seer. And if you have ever known something you had no rational way of knowing, you have touched this inheritance. The seer perceives what others cannot, not through mystical abilities, but through a cognitive architecture that processes vast quantities of unconscious data and delivers complete knowings. You walk into a room, and within minutes you have mapped every relational tension, every unspoken resentment, every fracture in the foundation no one else has noticed. This is not mind reading. This is pattern completion operating at a level most people cannot access. Your brain is running 10,000 calculations beneath conscious awareness. You are noticing micro-expressions, tonal shifts, energetic incongruences, and historical patterns. And your unconscious mind synthesizes all of it and hands you a conclusion that feels like prophecy. But here is the seer's burden that the oracles of Delphi knew intimately. To see clearly is to be perpetually alone with your seeing. You watch someone choose a path you know leads to ruin. You try to warn them with the urgency of someone watching a friend walk toward a cliff, and they smile at you with the kindness reserved for the overly anxious and continue walking. Cassandra's curse was not that she saw the future, it was that she saw truly and was never believed. Every INFJ carries this. You have given up trying to explain how you know. You have learned to say, I have a feeling about this, rather than, I can see exactly how this will unfold, because the certainty in your voice frightens people. They prefer their illusions, and you are left watching, knowing, unable to intervene. The seer's power is also the seer's isolation, because once you have seen the scaffolding holding reality together, you cannot unsee it. You cannot return to the innocence of taking things at face value. You are always reading beneath, always sensing the undercurrents, always aware of the gap between what people say and what they mean, between the surface story and the deeper pattern. This makes intimacy complicated. How do you rest in a conversation when you are simultaneously tracking its subtext? How do you trust someone when you can see their shadow before they acknowledge it themselves? The seer stands outside the village, not because they are rejected, but because the view from inside is unbearable. You see too much, and seeing too much makes you an unreliable participant in collective delusion. But the ancient seers were not isolated by accident. They were positioned at the threshold because that is where perception is clearest. The seer does not belong in the centre of the village because the centre is where consensus reality is thickest. The seer belongs at the edge, where the membrane between worlds is thin, where pattern becomes visible. Your loneliness is not punishment. It is the structural requirement of the role itself. And whilst you may never be fully believed, you will be sought when crisis comes. Because when the foundations crack and ordinary perception fails, people remember that there is someone who has always seen in the dark. The third lineage is the Mythic Guide, the guardian of thresholds, the one who helps others cross from one state of being to another whilst remaining at the edge themselves. You have done this more times than you can count, the friend in crisis who needed someone to hold space whilst they fell apart, the colleague navigating a transition who needed someone to reflect back on what they were becoming, the stranger who somehow knew they could confess their deepest shame to you, and you would not turn away. You are the person people come to when they are standing at the edge of transformation and do not know how to cross. And you guide them through with a steadiness that comes from having crossed similar thresholds yourself. But here is what makes the guide's role so demanding. You must be stable enough to hold space for another's chaos whilst they are actively destabilizing. You cannot fall apart when they are falling apart. You must maintain your ground even as the person you are guiding loses theirs. This requires extraordinary regulation. It requires knowing your own triggers so thoroughly that you can remain present when someone else's process activates them. It needs boundaries that are firm enough to protect you and porous enough to allow genuine connection. The guide is not a saviour, the guide is a presence, and that presence must be earned through your own inner work. You cannot guide someone through territory you have not walked yourself. The shadow of the guide is the weight of being the one who is always steady, the exhaustion of being the person everyone turns to, but who has nowhere to turn themselves. You have held so many people through their transitions that you have neglected your own. You have become so skilled at facilitating others' crossings that you have forgotten you also stand at thresholds. The guide needs guiding. The witness needs to be witnessed, and the loneliest position in the world is to be the one everyone relies upon, whilst having no one who can hold what you carry. This is why guides throughout history have had their own guides, their own teachers, their own lineages, because guiding is not a solo practice, it is a transmission that requires its own container. The Mythic Guides understood that threshold work is sacred. You are not helping someone with a problem. You are facilitating initiation. Every major life transition is a death and a rebirth. A person who enters the threshold is not surrounded by people who emerges, messages arriving guiding every someone few minutes, through that requires and reverence. Yet you feel like the last human being on earth, you are participating, not lonely in one of the oldest people when they say they need company. The elder, the psychopomp, lonely in the way someone knows the way because they have been exiled from a world that no longer exists. When you sit with someone in their darkest hour, if you've ever felt that modern life is somehow wrong at a structural level, continuing a practice that something essential has been stripped away. This is not burden, noise, this is inheritance. And here is where all three lineages converge in the INFJ carried. You are the alchemist who transforms through containment, and you are one of the few who still remembers. The guide who facilitates threshold crossing. This is not another video about INFJ overwhelm of the same cognitive architecture. This is about something older and stranger. This is about why you feel modernity's disconnect so profoundly that it sometimes feels like grief. Extraverted and why that grief is allows you to read and regulate emotional that you are perceiving something true. The combination produces an individual with what most people miss. Invisible structures and can work with them. The INFJ struggle with modern life is not about being too sensitive for a harsh world. They need to move forward. It is about being wired for depth hold immense complexity without collapsing under its weight. You were built for ritual. But the danger for the INFJ is replacing ritual with productivity from your own humanity. You were built for silence. That because you live in a world that mistakes noise for aliveness. That because you were built to perceive pain, you should never break under it. And you live in a world that fragments everything into isolated moments. This and tells you connection is whatever can be mediated through to the kind of exhaustion that makes you want to lock the trees away and never use them again. You feel meaning as a living thing. Vessel cracks, and modernity the seer goes blind from too much seeing. The guide collapses at the threshold. Here is the first thing you need to understand. And when that happens, you have not failed your inheritance in the way that you have simply forgotten that even ancient lineages required rest from reality. Required community. They were the ones required the humility to admit that power is not the same as invincibility. Your gifts are real. They are not metaphors. They are not personality quirks. They are specific capacities that have been recognized across cultures and throughout time, but they are also not obligations. You do not owe the world your alchemy, your sight, your guidance, simply because you possess them. The alchemists worked in solitude. The seers withdrew to mountaintops. The guides knew when to step back from the threshold. Your power includes the power to choose when, how, and for whom you make it available. And the most radical act an INFJ can perform is to protect these gifts as fiercely as you have used them, to say no to transformation that will cost you your foundation, to refuse to speak your seeing when it will not be heard, to step away from guiding when you yourself need tending. You are not here to save everyone. You are here to participate in the ancient patterns that give shape to human becoming. And that participation requires you to remain whole. The vessel cannot transform if it is shattered. The seer cannot perceive if they are drowning in what they see. The guide cannot hold space if they have collapsed. Your first responsibility is to the integrity of your own being. Everything else emerges from that. And when you honour this, when you tend your own alchemical process, sharpen your own sight, walk your own thresholds, you become more potent, not less, because you are no longer performing power from depletion. You are channeling it from depth. If this video has named what you have always known, but never heard spoken aloud, tell me in the comments which lineage you recognize most strongly. Are you primarily the alchemist, transforming what you contain? The seer, knowing what you cannot explain? The guide, holding space for others' crossings? Or do you feel the convergence of all three? Subscribe if you want to keep exploring this territory together. This is Power and Myth, where your capacities are not too much, they are your inheritance. Until next time, find your power, know your myth.